Handelsblatt Disrupt mit Sebastian Mattes.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von Handelsblatt Disrupt, dem Podcast über neue Ideen, Disruption und die Chancen Europas in der digitalen Welt. Mein Name ist Sebastian Mattes und ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich aus unserem Podcast-Studio hier in Düsseldorf.
Und das hören Sie heute bei Handelsblatt Disrupt.
Sie beginnt gerade, die Diskussion darüber, mit welchen Mitteln sich die Wirtschaft in ganz Europa ankurbeln lässt. Milliardenschwere Hilfspakete werden geschnürt und im ersten Schritt ging es ja um die Rettung von Industrie und Arbeitsplätzen mit allen dazugehörigen Kontroversen. Im zweiten Schritt geht es jetzt nicht mehr so sehr um Rettungspakete für Firmen, sondern um Milliardenausgaben, um die Konjunktur anzuschieben. Oft wird dabei von einem sozial-ökologischen Umbau der Wirtschaft gesprochen und einem nachhaltigen Neustart. Das ist sicher richtig und wichtig. Mir fehlt dabei aber eine Debatte darüber, wie sich Europa als Innovationsstandort stärken lässt. Mir fehlt eine Wirtschaftspolitik, die diesen Innovationsstandort in den Mittelpunkt stellt. Derzeit heißt es ja oft, die Welt werde nach Corona digitaler sein. Wenn wir diese Diskussion aber jetzt nicht führen, dann wird das, ein frommer Wunsch bleiben. Um diese Debatte jetzt in Gang zu bringen, habe ich im Rahmen einer virtuellen DLD-Veranstaltung ein Gespräch mit 2 Vordenkern zu genau dem Thema geführt. Der DLD gehört zu den wichtigsten Tech- und Innovationskonferenzen in Deutschland und einer meiner beiden Gesprächspartner war der CEO des Pharma- und Technologiekonzerns Merck, Stefan Oschmann.
European leaders are suddenly very interested in having a thriving biotech scene and are asked about what are the success factors? How can we have an innovation ecosystem that could really work? And there are many other aspects that are all of a sudden important.
Und der zweite Gast dieser Live-Aufzeichnung von Handelsblatt Disrupt war der Investor und Gründer der Risikokapitalgesellschaft Lakestar, Klaus Hommels, der vor allem fordert, Investments in Startups regulatorisch leichter zu machen.
I do believe that at the end it's a portfolio analysis. Yeah, so you have to structurally provide more means to develop or to discover the future.
Und am Ende noch ein Gespräch mit meinem Kollegen Julian Olk, der zusammen mit einem kleinen Team von Reportern einen neuen Newsletter für das Handelsblatt aufbaut, der Handelsblatt Inside Digital Health heißt. Und die Kollegen berichten exklusiv über die digitalen Trends in der Gesundheitsbranche. Welche das sind und auf welche Unternehmen wir achten sollten, das wird er uns gleich hier im Podcast erklären.
Sie hören Handelsblatt Disrupt und nach einer kurzen Werbeunterbrechung sind wir zurück.
Dieser Podcast wird Ihnen präsentiert von Microsoft Teams. Mit Meetings ist es immer das Gleiche. Dateien sind nicht auffindbar und wer nicht vor Ort ist, verpasst das Wichtigste. Okay, starten Sie Microsoft Teams. Von jedem Ort aus an Meetings teilnehmen, mit Kollegen chatten, Dateien finden und in Echtzeit bearbeiten. Sind Sie bereit, das volle Potenzial Ihres Teams zu entfalten? Starten Sie Teams. Mehr unter microsoft.com/Teams.
Der eine leitet eins der ältesten Tech- und Pharmaunternehmen Europas. Es geht um Stefan Oschmann, den CEO von Merck. Der leitet nicht nur seit Jahren erfolgreich einen Traditionskonzern. Sein Unternehmen investiert auch Millionensummen in zahlreiche Startups in den Bereichen Biotech, Gesundheit und innovative neue Materialien. Stefan Oschmann hat also einen ziemlich guten Überblick, was in der europäischen Innovationsszene so los ist. Der andere hat in viele Firmen investiert, deren Produkte wir jeden Tag nutzen. Der Investor Klaus Hommels, der sehr früh zum Beispiel in Facebook oder Spotify investiert hat und zuletzt einen 700 Millionen $ Fonds für europäische Tech-Startups aufgelegt hat. Sie beide eint der Optimismus, dass Europa nach der Krise ein Hotspot für Tech-Startups sein wird und auch werden muss, wenn es gegen die USA und China bestehen will.
I'm actually happy to be on stage again, at least on a virtual stage at DLD. Great what you guys built here. And I'm very happy to have 2 really visionary tech experts here today to discuss this very important topic, the question about the future of the European tech ecosystem after Corona. So just to set the stage, my first question to both of you, will Europe be a hotspot or will it be a not spot when it comes to technology after Corona? Just give me, let's say, 1 sentence, please. Stefan, what do you think?
In the area which I understand well, and that is biotech, I think that Europe will be a hotspot, and I leave digital platforms and so on to Klaus Hommels.
So, Klaus.
Look, so hope dies last, and I do think there's no option of not becoming a hotspot, because it will, as we see, it drives so many situations and important processes in life and in political life in Europe that we need to get it right.
So before we go deeper into that, let's go one step back. And Stefan, what was the moment you thought this Corona crisis will be something bigger than everybody thought? From what I understand, Merck has seen pretty early that something was going on.
Well, we went into at least sort of behind the scenes into a crisis mode in the third week of January, and we had identified three priorities to protect the safety and health of our employees and their families, business continuity and early recovery, and then to be an active player in combating this pandemic. I was in a way lucky to have been exposed to this pandemic preparedness thinking since many years, and there were quite a few people who've been communicating very actively. The thought leader being Bill Gates. So to me, this came not completely as a surprise. If you ask me, were you really properly prepared? I would say no.
Okay, Klaus, what was the moment when you realized what was going on?
Look, as you can see, tech hasn't been at the forefront of being affected. So I have to say I'm got aware of it as the normal processes every normal citizen got aware of it through mass media before it then had repercussions on our tech portfolios.
Okay, and Stefan, a couple of weeks ago you said it will take at least 18 months until we have a corona vaccine. If we are lucky, Merck is also doing research in that field. 18 months, is that still what you expect?
Well, so Merck has different businesses. Through our life science business, we're working with 45 vaccine projects, and we're supporting these, and we're setting up
So you have all the insights we need to know now.
So what I was saying was that if we are super lucky, we may have a vaccine later this year. If we are just lucky, we may have a vaccine around this time next year. Today, Moderna, a US company, has published phase 1 data that are really very promising. You know, they seem to have full seroconversion. It's a totally new technology. It's called mRNA. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to go into details, but it's a sort of revolutionary new technology. And there are two German companies, CureVac in Tübingen and BioNTech in Mainz, who are also leaders in this area. So I'm optimistic about vaccines. At the same time, we must be aware of the fact that if we have a vaccine, it will not be used in mass administration early on. You know, if this was a disease like Ebola or so that kills 50 or 60% of the people who get infected, that's a totally different story. But this virus causes a mortality, let's say, between 0.5 and 5%. So you need to be really sure that such a vaccine is properly tested. So the time we have a vaccine, it will be used initially in high-risk populations.
Okay, so we have to realize this whole situation will go on for a pretty long time. So I would like to talk about the time, what's happening after this whole crisis might be over. So how will the tech scene have changed in, let's say, 12 or 18 months, Klaus? What do you expect? What do you see now, and what do you expect will happen then? What business model will get stronger and which will maybe fade out? So what is your expectation?
Well, so in general, I identify three clusters. So there are the companies that would have survived without Corona, so they probably won't survive now as well. Then you have a group of companies that profit from Corona, meaning like the digital education, digital health, the Zooms of the world. And then there is this bracket in the middle, which had a functioning business model before Corona was there. And now they, like Get Your Guide or others, that do not have a functioning business currently, but it will come back. And the digital infrastructures allow these companies to react very quickly on these changes, meaning stop marketing right away, go into product development, and really foster and strengthen the advantages of technology. And when then everything opens up again, these will win, these companies, and they will win at the cost of the incumbents and of offline players. So so structurally, I think tech, as we can see that already in public markets, is holding very strongly against it. So it is the asset class of choice right now.
Could you give some examples for companies that you see or expect this kind of development?
So, well, look, I mean, the Zooms, they had 10 million concurrent users.
Sure, we have all talked about Zoom, sure. Mm-hmm.
In the vicinity, yeah. So, and then you have platform businesses like Glovo. So I do believe there is a new cohort being minted right now. So there are a lot of people that were reluctant to get into this digital business are now forced into the digital business. We see some businesses like the Nebenans, the Glovos, where cohorts are currently onboarding these businesses that do not have customer acquisition costs because you get forced into it. And these are very high qualitative users as well because they suddenly take the advantages of these or understand the advantages of these businesses and become very loyal and long-lasting customers. So in terms of cohort analysis, no customer acquisition costs or a fraction and very long lifetime and loyal customers. So that is something that is completely new.
We're going to talk about tech fields in a minute that will develop more quickly maybe. But before that, Stefan, I've read an op-ed from you in Handelsblatt a couple of weeks ago. You wrote that the COVID crisis could be a chance. Is it also a chance for a push for the European tech ecosystem? And do you see this push already happening?
I see a significant change in attitudes. I've been contacted by quite a few heads of government, ministers, etc. lately. For instance, I mean, we as a company, we define vaccine production processes and so on. And European leaders that were not really so interested in such things are suddenly very interested. European leaders are suddenly very interested in having a thriving biotech scene and ask about what are the success factors? How can we have an innovation ecosystem that could really work? And there are many other aspects that are all of a sudden important. We are the world's leading company when it comes to electronic materials. So all the materials you need for chip making. And we see that this business is booming right now as many of at least the large tech companies are understanding that software isn't a decisive factor anymore, given how chip design works these days, and they're going into and they're very active. And Apple has been doing that since quite some time. Google, etc. They're very active in chip design, and I see that among European leaders that they understand that we, in order to have some degree of autonomy in Europe, that we also need to strengthen our hardware base.
Let's for a minute go back to the biotech startups, because for years I've read articles on scientists leaving Germany, going to the United States. Big biotech clusters were developing around Boston, for example. So do you think this interest in the biotech scene is sustainable now, or is it only now in the crisis and in a couple of, let's say, 2 years or so, they will be forgotten again? Because to be honest, in the last years, nobody really was interested in them, right? Well,
that's, let's say, in the public media. But, if you look at the investment levels from venture capital, from family offices and corporate VCs into biotech, that's at a very high level. So I expect that this will continue to be thriving going forward. And it's not surprising that, for instance, right now, if you look at this mRNA technology, that is kind of the hottest technology in this whole thing, that 2 out of 3 leading companies are Germany-based. If you just look at the market cap of BioNTech has a market cap of 12 billion very shortly after the IPO. So that's a very promising area.
But they didn't go public in Germany.
Yeah, but they're headquartered in Germany. They have much of their science base in Germany. But any biotech company today is global.
Now let's talk about, because when we look into the world, we have these 2 tech superpowers, China and the US. And there is a big battle going on in several tech fields. And I always wonder, what could the role of Europe be? So this is what I would like to discuss with you now. What are the tech fields you feel Europe could play a major role, not even against US and China? Are there things only Europe can do, or Europe can do better than everybody else? This would be interesting. I mean, maybe Stefan, maybe you start.
Well, I was with a government delegation in Israel lately, and we have a long history in Israel. We as a company, we're operating there since more than 50 years, and we have close relationship with the Weizmann Institute and Hebrew University. And on the way back from Israel, government representatives asked me, so what do we learn? What do we learn from Israel? Because yes, there's the US, there's China. They're really, really successful and powerful in innovation. But there are examples like Israel or Estonia or Korea, who are small or medium-sized countries who've also developed an innovation ecosystem that works. And that applies both to the data and digital field as well as to biotech and hardware and so on. And what I see in these countries is that you have an early cooperation based on a clear government policy between academia, public sector, venture capital, and corporates, and that you often also have the military involved. I mean, look at the history of Silicon Valley. That was really the military that got that started. Where Europe could, from my point of view, where Europe would have an inherent strength is again in the health area. We have a healthcare system that is in most European countries somewhat centralized. We should have access to healthcare data. Obviously, we need to protect data privacy, data sovereignty, and so on. But we could actually, by making these data available in an appropriate way, we could create a really big advantage for Europe.
Klaus, what do you think? What are the strengths of Europe? What are the tech fields Europe play a major role in?
Well, look, we do have 1,500 world market leaders in Mittelstand in certain sectors. And as Mr. Oschmann pointed out, we're very strong in academia. Lately, socially, entrepreneurship has become way more an aspiration among young people and young academics. But we haven't had a decent funding environment. And it takes some time. You're developing the future, meaning not everything is logic. You have to give them not enough money to try out until an idea is viable or not. So look, the biggest companies that we have in Europe, like Spotify or Zalando, they just existed because they had special financing situation. Yeah? So Tengelmann put very early on a lot of money into Zalando when everybody was thinking, what did they smoke? That to put a 20 million and a 200 valuation that early on. Or Spotify, they were lucky that they were second-time entrepreneurs and could start finance the first 5, 6, 7 million themselves. So if that hadn't been the case, these two together would have roughly now 40 billion market cap that didn't exist. Yeah, so I do believe that at the end, it's a portfolio analysis. Yeah, so you have to structurally provide more means to develop or to discover the future.
Change in regulation lately in two European countries, the Netherlands and France. You know, we have financial regulation, financial legislation in Europe that makes it very difficult for certain types of institutional investors to go into venture, insurances, other areas that have obligations to invest in I don't know, government bonds or something. The Netherlands and France have piloted this, and it's amazing to see how fast venture capital grows if the regulatory environment changes.
So what would be your idea for Germany? What would you call for?
Maybe, Klaus, you know more about the specific regulation, but there are regulations for institutional investors that could easily be changed so that we have more venture capital. And venture capital is nothing risky. It's risky with regard to one specific investment. Or it's not more risky than other investments if you have a basket approach to this. And if you look at the corporate venture funds, for instance, we have in our company, we have a venture fund that we started, I think 15 years ago. We have extremely good returns on that.
So, I would buy arguments that say, look, basically in the 2000s, the performance was questionable or didn't meet expectation. But if you look at the European Investment Fund that has a structural mandate to invest in venture, and meaning not doing a selection, but rather if there is a new venture fund in Poland or Slovakia or Slovenia, they invest in these. And if you ask them, they said, we tried heavily to lose money, but we didn't succeed. And on a fund of fund portfolio, they basically have a pretty decent standard deviation and have a yield in the 2012 or 13 vintage of like 11-13% IRR. So if you look at if you take this data and then you go into the regulation for insurances, they have to calculate with a normal statistical model to underpin investments in venture with the least performing 0.5 percentile that may happen in any given standard deviation that they calculate, meaning or resulting in 50% equity to underpin it with 50% equity. So this doesn't make it attractive. And if you adopted these kind of regulation, I think there are a lot of direct advantages, also indirect advantages that are fostered through this kind of initiatives.
For me, the best is Israel. Israel has a chief scientist at cabinet level. That's an ex-venture person. Or if you look at Israeli universities or research institutions, Hebrew University has such an active tech transfer agenda. At Hebrew University, sometimes art historians create startups. It's sort of normal for any professor at Hebrew University to engage in a business builder. The Weizmann Institute has been super successful with regard to this. I see some progress in our academic institutions. They are high quality, but there was a little bit of old style thinking before, as if getting into tech transfer was something that was not acceptable. That is hopefully changing. I hope that it's going to change faster.
But maybe we have to work a little bit on the perception. So of venture capital. So I don't and startups. So it's not that you buy a Mac, go to Soho House, order an avocado toast with a fried egg on it, and say I'm an entrepreneur. So that's not what it is. So it is a hard life. You bet your career on for 5 or 6 years on one trick pony, but the effects are humongous if you take the numbers. So the US invested $870 billion in venture since 1995. So the outcome is something like 6 trillion market cap, which is roughly 33% of their GDP. So 11% of the work of the employees are in venture-funded companies, and 44% of the entire R&D is currently done by venture-founded companies. If you take the same numbers in Germany, so it's not that we have 34 or 33% of GDP through venture companies, but we have 1.5. So meaning in 23 years, the delta of these both is exactly 1 time DAX. So this is what venture created for the US as a and it's always become a big backbone of the industry. And we did fail so far. So we have to really take that serious.
Okay, but when we talk about money, we are in a situation where we have more money in the world than ever before, and there's more money being produced every day, and VCs are heavily funded and so on and so forth. And from what I hear in Europe, all the good ideas, and in Germany, all the good ideas are more or less getting funding. So is it really a money problem because there's enough money in the world? Or is it an idea problem that we don't have enough great ideas that have a chance against the competitors in China and the US? Klaus.
Look, I mean, so the last years have been way more efficient in creating big companies. If you take the cadence in which unicorns have been built, and if you take the valuation they have now, so ever more companies have been built and ever bigger valuations there. So, but you have to distinguish between early and growth. So I'm really heavily advocating that we do need to fund the growth companies ourselves. So otherwise, we do not happen. Just give you an idea. So like 2 years back, we did an analysis, which of the big platform businesses that had not been listed yet, they raised, the 25 platform businesses, they raised something like 64 billion in 8 years. European companies took part in 14% of the financing rounds. They invested 1.9% of the capital and are represented with 1.4% in the cap tables. So you can say, look, they got financed, but if you say Europe should have a self-esteem and be proud and should play a role in this, then by every metrics you make, inhabitants, GDP, we should be in a punchline of something like 20-25%. And we happen with 1.4%. I think that is clearly underrepresenting what we are. And that is something which can only be repaired by being able to take part in cap tables of very successful companies.
Stefan, what do you think? Is there enough money in the world? Or do we need more European money?
In the world, yes. And specifically in Europe, let's say in biotech, there is okay seed money. And also when Series A are run or so, this is usually also okay. Let's say in my field, a Series A would be an individual investor would kick in 10 million or so, and a Series B would be 50 to 100 or so. What is really lacking is growth money. But money is one thing. I think that actually there are plenty of good ideas in Europe, and there are plenty of good people in academia and in many other areas. What is lacking is a dedicated government policy and a coherent innovation ecosystem in which people cooperate without borders, without saying, oh, this is private sector, this is public sector, this is academia.
Will the government ever move in that direction, or do we have to wait until we really have a chief scientist in the cabinet?
I have over the past weeks and months, I had plenty of interactions with government people in Germany and other European countries, Asian countries. My impression is that, let's say, when we speak for the German side, that this crisis was really a major wake-up call for our politicians in that respect. Mm-hmm. I had an opportunity to interact with Ursula von der Leyen this morning. I mean, for instance, the EU has started a pledging conference for vaccine development where they brought together they're bringing together 8 billion on a global basis. I think the EU is going to probably copy what the US is doing with BARDA. That's a vehicle to invest in innovation to address the crisis and so on. So I am cautiously optimistic.
Oh, that's good to hear. How about you, Klaus? Are you optimistic? Will Corona make everybody understand what is at stake, right? That we really need a bigger push for the tech ecosystem.
Yeah, so look, at the beginning I was I had some sympathy that it is an abstract thing if you are a politician and suddenly the internet comes along. Yeah, but at the moment then when they discovered that it is way more efficient to have a nice algorithm in Facebook for elections than gluing some nice pictures on some trees. So you could have seen that that technology is very, very powerful. And I do believe that in general, the perception is now there. And ideally, they have to go into two directions. So one is the financing part, and I did already allude to it. But the other, for me, is system-critical infrastructures, where you need to be aware which ones would you want to control and which ones you cannot lose. Yeah? To give you an example, if any of us in Europe doesn't want to touch cash anymore, so if we want to pay, we do that with MasterCard, Visa, or Amex. This is all US technology, and it's a technological backbone in the US. So if that's suddenly taken away, we do not have consumer payments in Europe anymore. Is that something that, in terms of autarky, to be the captain of our own fate, something that we should strive for? No, I think it is a vulnerability that politicians should think of. And I'm sure that there are some more fields like this which deserve attention on a European scale.
I've said that in the beginning, and we have talked a little bit about technology, but I'm not really satisfied with what I've heard from you. And I know that you both are real visionary tech experts. So I would like to know from both of you, like 2 or 3 technologies you really find fascinating at the moment, something that keeps you awake at night, maybe or not. But and also something that really could play a bigger role in Europe. So Stefan, maybe start with you. So what exactly, maybe some company you have seen, some trend you see, what is it?
Well, let's say in biotech, it's clearly this mRNA technology that is so super hot right now, that can be used for vaccines against corona, that can be used in cancer treatments and so on. That's an area I would watch very, very closely, and there are several players coming up. There has been a lot of hype about CAR T and so-called TCRs. These are cell-based therapies. I'm a bit concerned about Europe. For instance, China has, I think, 150 clinical trials with CAR T, and Europe has 15. But there are some very interesting companies there. When it comes to the other business, I'm very active in semiconductor. We're deep into quantum computing, and I think that Europe has a chance to become a major player in this area. This is still very early. Obviously, we have the Googles and everybody else in this super active, but there's so many startups in quantum computing. We have, with our venture fund, we have invested in several of them. And a totally unrelated thing that I am very much in love with, and where we have several important European players, is in the food area. We are investing in what is called future meat, i.e. that is make meat, real meat, but not from animals, but in cell culture. And you can do this with any type of meat, with any type of fish, and it looks as if the ecological impact of that is extremely beneficial.
Did you try that already?
I've tried it.
How is it?
I tasted one of the first burgers that was made. This one burger cost at that time $250,000, and it tasted more like $2 or so. But there is so much progress happening, and you can make chicken. We've recently invested in a company that makes mozzarella. That way, so to avoid that people have to eat baby mozzarella. It was a joke, obviously. So I think that also, while some people might find this notion strange or even disgusting, I think there's a lot of future in food technology, because if we want to make an impact on this, on the environment and on this planet, we really need to think differently.
How about you, Klaus?
Yeah, it's funny that Stefan mentioned this food tech. Yeah, so I've been investing into this for some time with Impossible Food, or same for leather. And for dairies, like with Modern Meadow and Perfect Day. So I think this is, when I look at it on a helicopter perspective, there's always very big disruption when several trends come together. And in this field, you have clearly the cost for DNA desequency and the power of computers in then working with these kind of data, and the cost of fermentation, where these 3 things come together and allow in some period of time that maybe proteins that are necessary to create food are cheaper from the artificial world than from the original world, and that will help mankind a lot. So that I've been looking a little bit, and I do think those kind of things Europe is should have actually good chances.
But many stories in that field you hear from the United States, right? At the moment.
Yes,
money is going into that field.
Yeah, from the United States, yeah, because they're faster. Maybe also they were more courageous and giving them a little bit more money. But the advantage here is also that you do not have oligopolies that could be a little bit like detrimental for the growth of these kind of companies.
What does that mean?
Look, you do not have a oligopolistical power that can absorb a lot of the innovation and the new companies and make their life a little bit more complex.
What company are you thinking of?
I don't need to get into that one.
Okay.
Yeah,
so we do have a few questions from the audience. One user wrote, how can a board truly foster an innovation culture when new ideas are seen as positive and making mistakes is not killing your career? It's a bit longer question, but I think that's the point. And I think you have some experience in your company with that. So give us an insight how innovation works at Merck.
Well, we were, let's say, if you go back a bit more than 10 years ago, we were a very traditional pharmaceutical and chemicals company. And we embarked on a complete transformation process. We have defined corporate values. And these slogans always sound a little bit cheesy, but we really mean it. And we're saying we're curious minds dedicated to human progress. That means that we have joy in developing new things. Minds means we're rational, and we want to do this for a purpose. And then we've done many things of opening up. We have opened innovation centers in China very, very successfully. We have, I was talking about our venture funds. We have incubators, accelerators in Israel on the West Coast. And we embarked on a very serious digitalization effort, which helps us right now. We have founded several joint ventures, for instance, one with Palantir, it's called Syntropy, on managing cancer research data. We have moved this in the COVID crisis to be dedicated 100% toward COVID research. And we have changed our organization. We have an innovation organization, a business builder, an enterprise builder. We'll be creating an environment where individual employees who have ideas get funding as if it was from a venture fund, and they can.
How does that work? That's an interesting concept.
And it has already provided significant financial returns to us. I don't want to say that we are a superior company or something, but we took a conscious decision that everything in our company is about innovation and curiosity. We are very financially minded at the same time. We're very purpose minded, and we think that the combination of this really helps because people want to make a career. They want to have money. They want to have some security. What they want to work on something that is fun, and they want to work on something that is good for this world. And if you try to combine this, and we're by no means perfect, you can create a culture where you can overcome the inherent bureaucracy tendency that any large organization has.
Another user question, Klaus, I think that's best for you. Is not any single company too small to compete with the big tech companies in China or the US? And the idea, are next generation cooperatives of many European companies a possible solution to compete with the big?
Pretty complex to me. It has always been like that. Yeah. So and I've just discussed with Mike Morris from Sequoia. I mean, if you are afraid of breaking of getting into competition with the big ones, then you shouldn't start, because that will come, and it has always been there. The only difference might be where we need to make sure that we have a smart regulation if it becomes systemic. Because if you do have you need to have platform neutrality, and these kind of things are compulsory, because if competition gets hindered on that end, then it is very structural, and we need to make sure that there is a level playing field for all the innovations to succeed.
Great. Okay, so we come to our last question already, and I would like to know from you guys what Corona will change in your personal life, maybe with a tech perspective, but it doesn't have to be. What will stay after the crisis? Klaus?
I think the likelihood of video conferencing and not flying so much, which is basically driven like this.
Really?
There's the cohorts that...
Oh, God. I hate video conference because you can't walk around. Everybody, I mean, if we would talk at the phone, I could just stand up and nobody would wonder what I'm doing.
So it depends on how much you fly. So I think historically, I would have argued that you can do video conferences after you've met the person the first time in real life. So then there's a certain trust there. Currently, we have swapped to video conferences only. We did investments where we didn't meet the founders in real life. And I do believe this is rather here to stay than to be an exception.
Okay, we will see. Thank you very much. Stefan?
I have in my company, we have quite a few people who cannot work through video conference because they really make things. They have to be physically there, and majority of our colleagues has carried on working. So I couldn't spend all my time at the home office, but I did, and I was surprised how productive I was. I canceled all the meetings where I participate more for decorative purposes or so. I travel to China once a month. I travel to the US once a month, and much other travel. I can't give up that entirely. But for the past couple of weeks, I've spent the mornings in video conferences with Asia, the midday video conferences with Europe, and the afternoons and evenings in video conferences with the Americas. And I think I've achieved in these weeks more than I would achieve in months. So I don't think it's completely sustainable, but I was absolutely surprised how well that works. And I've become an expert at all these video conference platforms in the meantime.
Thank you so much for all these insights and the good discussion. I think we have to go on at some point to talk again about it because the topic is so big.
Seit einigen Monaten gibt es ein neues Produkt beim Handelsblatt, den Newsletter Handelsblatt Insight Digital Health. Darin geht es um die Digitalisierung des Gesundheitswesens und mein Kollege Julian Olk, der diesen Newsletter mit aufbaut, ist jetzt hier bei mir im Studio und er wird uns von den neuesten Trends und Entwicklungen in dem Feld berichten. Hallo Julian.
Hallo Sebastian.
Warum sollte man sich jetzt eigentlich mit dem Thema digitale Gesundheit beschäftigen? Gibt es nicht wichtigere Themen, die Bewältigung der Corona-Krise zum Beispiel?
Ja, das beides hängt ja ganz, ganz eng miteinander zusammen. Wir haben einen enormen Push sowieso schon beim Thema Digitalisierung im Gesundheitswesen und die Corona-Krise sorgt jetzt nochmal extrem dafür, dass dieses Thema jetzt nochmal extrem weiter vorangetrieben wird.
Dann lass uns das doch mal aufbohren. Was sind so die 3 wichtigsten Trends, die du da siehst?
Naja, wir haben grundsätzlich schon rein politisch Themen, die jetzt anstehen. Hinzu kommt jetzt, dass die Corona-Krise das Ganze noch viel weiter voranpusht. Wir haben zum Beispiel, wenn man sich die Gesundheitsämter anschaut, das sind Ämter, klassische Behörden, die gerne noch mit Excel-Tabellen und Kugelschreiber und Papier arbeiten.
Und Fax.
Und Fax gerne auch noch. Jetzt kommen wir aber dazu, dass da extrem digitalisiert wird, dass Meldewege digitalisiert werden, dass insgesamt die Arbeit digitalisiert wird, die Arbeit mit Startups zusammen. Also es ist eigentlich dieses klassische Bild der Behörde im Gesundheitsamt funktioniert überhaupt nicht mehr. Das ist sehr spannend zu sehen im Moment, was da alles passieren kann.
Und welche Trends sollte man noch im Blick behalten?
Die App auf Rezept ist ein ganz wichtiger Trend. Das startet jetzt, und zwar, dass Krankenversicherungen Gesundheits-Apps bezahlen werden. Deutschland ist damit weltweit das erste Land, wo das gemacht wird. Die ersten Anträge gehen da jetzt in diesen Tagen ein. Und das ist tatsächlich eine Weltneuheit und könnte die gesamte Gesundheitsversorgung in seinen Grundfesten verändern, kann man sagen.
Dann nenn doch mal so 2, 3 Beispiele von Apps, die du in den letzten Wochen gesehen hast, die dich am meisten beeindruckt haben, an deren Modelle du am meisten glaubst.
Es gibt da so einen Trend Richtung Symptomchecker. Das ist ganz spannend. Ärzte, wenn die jemanden behandeln und auf der Suche nach einer Krankheit sind, ist das Ganze immer durchaus subjektiv. Deswegen holt man sich teilweise Zweitmeinungen ein. Symptomchecker gehen da durchaus strukturierter vor. Also ich gebe meine Probleme in die App ein und schaue mir dann ungefähr an, was sagt eine künstliche Intelligenz dahinter, was kann das Ganze sein. Da gibt es verschiedene. Ada Health ist da die größte deutsche. Die sind auch ordentlich breit finanziert und international unterwegs, aber da gibt es immer wieder neue und das ist unheimlich spannend zu sehen, weil das wirklich nicht auf eine bestimmte Krankheit abzielt, sondern insgesamt versucht, etwas an der Gesundheitsversorgung zwischen Arzt und Patient im Verhältnis was zu ändern.
Es gibt ja immer wieder auch Berichte über Datenschutzprobleme. Ich meine, gerade wenn wir jetzt anfangen, große Teile der Diskussion über unsere Gesundheit in die digitalen Angebote zu verlegen, wird das ja ein noch wichtigeres Thema. Wie sind denn da so die Entwicklungen?
Ja, Datenschutz ist das Riesenthema, was immer bei diesen Dingen, bei diesen Diskussionen mitschwingt. Es gibt da immer wieder so kleinere bis halbgroße Skandelchen, würde ich es mal nennen. Aber insgesamt muss es ja darum gehen, dass wir die Gesundheitsversorgung auf den Stand des 21. Jahrhunderts bringen und es schaffen, die digitalen Lösungen da voranzubringen. Das heißt, Digitalisierung und Datenschutz schließen sich da nicht aus. Das heißt, es muss Hand in Hand gehen. Und klar, das ist in den Diskussionen immer ein wichtiger Punkt. Aber mir ist zum Beispiel wichtig, dass das Ganze zusammengesehen wird und nicht das eine als Bremse für das andere.
Ihr habt das ja im Newsletter auch eng verfolgt, wenn es dann Datenschutzprobleme gibt. Gibt es irgendwie Angebote oder Dinge, mit denen man eher vorsichtig sein sollte als Nutzer?
Ich würde sagen, man kann das nie pauschalisieren. Also es gibt so Dinge, wenn wir jetzt zum Beispiel Richtung Corona-Krise schauen, gibt es da Angebote, die wollen zum Beispiel per GPS-Daten die Aufenthaltsorte der Infizierten tracken und ähnliches. Bei sowas würde ich grundsätzlich aufpassen, wenn es darum geht, dass an staatlichen Lösungen wie dieser Corona-App gearbeitet wird und dann private Anbieter kommen, die sowas in der Richtung machen. Das heißt nicht, dass es alles schlecht ist. Es gibt auch durchaus Anbieter, die können das vielleicht sogar besser als der Staat. Wichtig ist nur, dass man sich damit auseinandersetzt. So.
Ihr arbeitet ja für den Newsletter auch investigativ. Gibt doch mal so einen Ausblick, mit was für einem Thema befasst ihr euch in der nächsten Ausgabe?
Großes Thema der nächsten Ausgabe ist die elektronische Patientenakte. Okay. Das wird der zentrale Meilenstein ist das politischerseits der Digitalisierung im Gesundheitswesen, wo die ganze Dokumentation hineinkommen soll, was jetzt teilweise auch noch auf Papier oder auch anders analog geregelt wird. Das Ganze ist natürlich, da sind wir auch wieder beim Thema Datenschutz, mit einer enormen Sicherheitsarchitektur verbunden. Dieses ganze Gesundheitsdatennetz, was da entstehen soll. Die Anforderungen an die Industrie sind extrem hoch. Seit 2004 gibt es diese Pläne für die elektronische Patientenakte. Jetzt haben wir 2020 und die Akte ist immer noch nicht da.
Genau.
Sie soll dann nächstes Jahr starten, aber auch dieser Termin wackelt jetzt aus verschiedenen Gründen wieder, weil es da auch wieder Probleme gibt, dass die Anforderungen sehr hoch sind. Und jetzt kommt auch noch die Coronakrise dazu. Darüber haben wir dann im nächsten Newsletter mehr zu berichten.
Und ihr macht ja auch live Expertengespräche, wo sich dann eure Leser einwählen können in Diskussionsrunden. Wer war so der spannendste Gesprächspartner oder spannendste Gesprächspartnerin?
Wir hatten zuletzt einen Entwickler da, der unter anderem auch an einer Corona-App arbeitete und haben den zusammengesetzt mit jemandem vom Chaos Computer Club. Das war sehr spannend. Da sind wir wieder bei dem, worüber wir vorhin gesprochen haben. Wie schaffe ich Digitalisierung mit Datenschutz zusammenzubringen? Und die beiden haben erstaunlich, hat natürlich auch Differenzen, so wie das auch sein soll in so einem Gespräch, aber haben auch erstaunlich viele Punkte gehabt, bei denen sie übereingestimmt haben. Das war absolut eine spannende Diskussion, diese beiden Seiten zusammenzubringen.
Sehr spannend. Vielleicht nochmal zum Abschluss so 2, 3 Sätze. Wo kann man dich erreichen? Bei LinkedIn, bei Twitter, wenn man nachverfolgen will, an was ihr gerade arbeitet?
Ja, selbstverständlich digital natürlich. LinkedIn, Twitter, das sind so unsere Hauptkanäle bei Social Media, die üblichen, die man da so finden kann. Und die klassische E-Mail ist natürlich auch gerne immer noch dabei.
Die Informationen zu dem Newsletter finden Sie natürlich nochmal in den Shownotes, genauso wie die Kontaktdaten zu den Redakteuren. Julian, ganz herzlichen Dank für diese Einblicke.
Sehr gerne.
Und damit sind wir dann auch schon am Ende von Handelsblatt Disrupt. Wie immer freue ich mich über Kommentare in unserer Handelsblatt Disrupt LinkedIn-Gruppe oder senden Sie mir einfach eine Mail. Auch diese Details finden Sie wie immer in den Shownotes. Dank an dieser Stelle auch für die Unterstützung von Alexander Voss, der mir hier gegenüber sitzt, und Migo Fecke und Regina Körner von professionalpodcast.com, dem Dienstleister für Strategieberatung und Podcastproduktion. Wir melden uns nächste Woche Freitag wieder. Bis dahin wünsche ich Ihnen eine schöne Woche und interessante digitale und auch analoge Zeiten. Ihr Sebastian Mattes.